Today, we're diving into a problem that feels incredibly new, but actually has roots stretching back decades. We're talking about the absolute explosion of business intelligence tools and, the data chaos that almost always seems to follow.
So here's a question you've probably asked yourself at work. You look around, and marketing is using one tool, finance is using another, and the sales team has a completely different one, and they're all trying to do basically the same thing. How on earth does that happen? Well, it usually starts pretty small.
You see, the story of how this chaos begins is almost always the same. It doesn't start with some big, grand, unified strategy. Nope. It starts with a bunch of small, totally separate decisions.
Think about it. Business intelligence rarely just appears in a company all at once. It grows organically, almost like a weed, department by department. One team has a problem, they find a tool that solves it, and bam, they put it to work. It's a quick fix, right? But when you have dozens of teams all doing that same thing, you end up with this massive, accidental overlap of technology and data.
And this piecemeal approach, this let everyone do their own thing method, has a really predictable and, frankly, a very problematic outcome. It starts building invisible walls all throughout the company's data.
So what actually happens when every department just builds its own little solution without talking to anyone else? What does that uncoordinated mess actually create?
It creates something called analytic silos, and this is the real killer. It's not just about having a bunch of different tools. It's that each one of these little silos starts defining key business metrics in its own special way. All of a sudden, the definition of an active customer or net margin completely changes depending on which department's report you happen to be looking at.
And right there, that's the fundamental conflict. The entire promise, the whole reason for BI, is to have a single source of truth. But these analytic silos, they create the exact opposite. Instead of getting clarity, you get this cacophony of conflicting data, and you end up in meetings where executives are arguing about whose numbers are right, instead of deciding what to do about the numbers.
Now, it's one thing to talk about this as an idea, but when you look at the actual numbers, that's when you really see the true scale of the chaos.
So just how bad does it actually get? I mean, are we talking about a couple of extra tools here and there, or is this something way bigger?
Well, on average, a typical organization is juggling tools from about 3.2 different BI vendors. Now, that might not sound like a crazy number, but just think about what that means. That's at least 3 separate contracts to manage, 3 different technologies for IT to support, and 3 different sets of licenses to pay for. But wait, it gets worse.
Because those 3.2 vendors translate into an average of 13 distinct BI tools. 13! How is that even possible? Well, a single big vendor might sell you a separate tool for reporting, another for dashboards, and a third for data mining. Plus, with all the industry consolidation, one company might now own 3 or 4 other brands that used to be their competitors.
And as you'd probably expect, this problem gets bigger as the company gets bigger. An organization with over $5 billion in revenue averages almost 4 different BI vendors. It just makes sense, right? More departments and more business units simply create more opportunities for more tools and deeper silos.
Okay, so we've seen just how big the problem is, but to even begin to think about how to fix it, we really have to understand the root causes. Why does this keep happening?
The number one reason, and it's actually a pretty legitimate one, is that different users just have different needs. A financial analyst needs different things than a sales manager. Fair enough. But look at the other big reasons. Departments wanting their own autonomy, vendors not having every single feature, and tools that are just embedded inside other applications you buy. It's basically a perfect storm for creating tool chaos.
This kind of uncontrolled growth leads to a particularly nasty symptom, something called spreadmart disease. It's what happens when users can't get what they need from the official systems, so they just export the data and build their own little mini data empires in spreadsheets and access files.
And the scale of this so-called disease can be just mind-boggling. One company actually scanned its servers and found 15,000 Microsoft Access databases and 850,000 Excel spreadsheets, all being used as independent data sources. I mean, can you imagine trying to manage that? It's an impossible amount of unaudited, siloed data.
Eventually, things reach a breaking point. The chaos becomes unsustainable. The cost and the confusion just get so high that organizations are forced to do something about it. And this leads to the great push for standardization.
And the reasons for standardizing are pretty much the mirror image of all the problems we've been talking about. The number one driver? Reducing costs. Getting rid of all those redundant licenses and support contracts. But right behind that is the critical need for consistent information, for better integration, and honestly, just for the pure efficiency of dealing with fewer vendors.
Now here's the final, and I think most crucial point. All of the data we've just walked through, it comes from a landmark study that was conducted way back in 2005. Yeah, 2005. The problems were perfectly clear almost 2 decades ago. So the question I really want to leave you with is this. When you look at your own organization today, with all the new cloud tools and modern technologies, has anything really changed?
If this explainer helps shed some light on the data landscape for you, please do us a solid and like, share, and subscribe for more. We'll see you in the next one.